Good morning, everyone. Today I will talk about the following work entitled Ecoworry in the Digital Age, Climate Change Media Exposure and the Protective Role of Coping Strategies in Italian Emerging Adults. Climate change represents one of the primary global challenges of the 21st century, with far-reaching implications for human health, the economy, and the structure of contemporary societies. The period 2015 to 2025 has been recorded as the warmest decade on record, with Europe and the Mediterranean region emerging as among the most vulnerable areas to this rapid evolution. Furthermore, the climate crisis poses significant risks to mental health. Its psychological impact stems not only from the direct exposure to extreme weather events, but also from the continuous indirect perception of the climate threat. Today, social media have become the primary source of information regarding the climate crisis, particularly among young adults. However, media communication is frequently characterized by dramatic tones and alarmist framing, which contribute to the onset of negative environmental emotions, such as eco-anxiety, eco-worry, helplessness, frustration, and uncertainty, especially among younger demographics. Furthermore, emerging adults, who are already navigating a delicate developmental transition, represents a population particularly vulnerable to the psychological effects of climate change communication. Within the context of the psychological impact of climate change, coping strategies play a pivotal role as they shape how individuals process climate related information and manage the associated stress. In particular, the literature has identified three primary climate change coping strategies: problem centered coping, meaning centered coping, and de emphasizing avoiding coping. Although international literature has begun to document the psychological effects of exposure to climate crisis information, evidence regarding the role of climate change information exposure in the development of climate change worry remains limited within the Italian context. The present study aims to investigate the relationship between climate change information exposure and the resulting heightened emotional states and eco-worry, while examining the potential moderating role of coping strategies within a sample of Italian emerging adults. Furthermore, the study explores the sources and perceived quality of climate change information. Guided by the existing literature, this study addresses the following research questions. Does media exposure occur primarily through social media or traditional media channels? Furthermore, what is the perceived quality of the information to which emerging adults are exposed? And what emotions emerge in response to exposure to climate change related content? And finally, what role do problem centered coping, meaning centered coping, and the emphasizing avoidant coping strategies play in the relationship between climate change information, exposure, and eco worry? The main descriptive findings highlight moderate to high levels of media exposure to climate change information, moderate to high levels of climate change worry, and a prevalence of negative affect elicited by such exposure. Social media emerge as the dominant information source, with the content generally perceived as non specialized. Problem-centered coping emerged as the most widely used strategy, followed by meaning-centered coping, and lastly, threat de-emphasizing. Prior to proceeding with subsequent analysis, preliminary diagnostic tests confirmed the absence of multicollinearity among the variables, as well as the absence of residual error violations. Gender exhibited a small yet statistically significant negative correlation with both negative affect and climate change worry, indicating that gender-based differences influence these constructs. Climate change information exposure was positively correlated with both the resulting negative affect and climate change worry. Individuals who report higher levels of climate change worry experience greater negative affect and tend to employ constructive or active coping strategies, specifically problem-centered and meaning-centered coping, while showing a reduced reliance on threat minimizing or avoidant behaviors. As shown by the model of problem-centered coping, problem-centered coping accounted for 42% of the adjusted variance in climate change worry scale. Problem-centered coping emerged as a significant moderator in mitigating the effect of climate change information exposure on Ecoworry, thereby serving as a protective factor. The meaning-centered coping model accounted for 29% of the adjusted variance. Meaning-centered coping also emerged as a significant moderator in mitigating the effect of climate change information exposure on Ecoworry, likewise acting as a protective factor. The de-emphasizing avoidant coping model, the third model, accounted for 31% of the variance. The emphasizing avoidant coping emerged as a significant moderator in amplifying the effect of climate change information exposure on Ecoworry, thereby acting as a risk factor. So, although social media can foster awareness and activism, they are, consistent with previous findings, more strongly associated with negative emotions and climate change worry than traditional media. We hypothesize that both problem-focused and problem-centered and meaning-centered coping constitute effective tools for worry management, enabling individuals to maintain a level of vigilance conducive to pro-environmental engagement while simultaneously mitigating the risk of climate anxiety or chronic distress. Regarding the emphasizing avoidant coping, although avoidance appears to reduce worry in general, it amplifies the impact of media exposure on climate worry. Consequently, it proves to be a dysfunctional strategy. Encouraging engagement in concrete, goal-oriented action at both individual and collective levels can enhance the sense of agency, hope for potential change, and trust in governmental institutions. The present study has several important limitations. These include the presence of potential self-selection bias and use of a single method approach, the predominance of university students in the sample, the adoption of a non-probabilistic snowball sampling procedure, and a cross-sectional design that does not allow for causal or directional inferences among variables. In addition, a further limitation concerns the geographical distribution of the sample, with most participants recruited from southern Italy, particularly the Campania region. This geographical concentration may limit the representativeness of the findings. Regarding future research direction, further studies could explore the role of additional variables in the relationship between exposure, and Ecoworry, as well as adopt a person-centered approach to identify distinct profiles that account for the interaction among the three climate change coping strategies, which in the current study were instead examined individually. Thank you for your attention.